Can I teach pronunciation if I'm a non-native speaker? Can I teach pronunciation if English is not my first language? What about my foreign accent? Will the student notice? Will the student somehow pick up this accent? Will the pronunciation improvements be worse if I'm a non-native speaker? It's amazing, really, how many things we worry about when it comes to teaching pronunciation as a non-native speaker. That's why in this video, I want to dispel all those possible worries that you might be having about teaching pronunciation if English is not your first language. So let's get started. Before we dive into it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right below the video and also that little bell icon so you don't miss any of my future videos. And if you're new here, my name is Marek Kiczkowiak. I run TEFL Equity Advocates and Academy, where I help English teachers tackle native speakerism and teach English for global communication. Now, since English is not my first language either, I completely understand if as a second language English user, you worry what your students might think when you start teaching pronunciation. You worry perhaps about making mistakes when teaching pronunciation. You might worry that you have a foreign accent. There are so many worries that we as non-native speakers might have. And in order to talk about them in a little bit more detail, I wanted to invite Professor John Levis and share with you a very quick part of an interview that I did with Professor John Levis a while back. And one of the questions that I asked Professor John Levis was precisely this: should you worry about teaching pronunciation if you're a non-native speaker? And are native speakers better at teaching pronunciation? He's got an incredible amount of research done and also an incredible number of English teachers that he's trained throughout his career. So that's why I was really curious to see what he thought about this issue, both from a practical standpoint as a teacher trainer and from a researcher's standpoint, to see what research evidence there is when it comes to teaching pronunciation as a non-native speaker. And this is what Professor John Levis told me.
If we take seriously the goal of intelligibility, then we need to say that intelligible speakers are fine to teach pronunciation. And realistically, you know, they know more often than the native speakers anyway, because they have worked on trying to learn things that were difficult for them. And I don't see why they shouldn't teach pronunciation. This has never made sense to me as to why people think that any native speaker is better than any non-native speaker, because it's frankly insane. A non-native, anybody who's trained to teach pronunciation is better than anybody who's not trained. And pronunciation is not like a disease, right? It's not something that you catch from the person that you're in contact with, right? If that worked, then we could just play tapes for everybody and leave it at that, right? People don't get my pronunciation from being in my classes. People won't get the same pronunciation of any teacher from being in their classes. And you know, I've had non-native and native teachers learn to teach pronunciation with me for the last 20 years, and so I recognize your comments. Non-native teachers always are afraid. They're always afraid that somehow they're going to be found out, or they're going to be inadequate, or they're going to be unconfident and it's not going to work. And the native speakers don't seem to think this, but ultimately they all do a great job, and they all find, yes, they can teach just fine.
For me, one of the key takeaways from this short extract is that pronunciation really is not like a contagious disease. It's not something that your students will catch from you, especially not when they spend 2 or 3 hours a week in a general English classroom with you. If this were true, we could simply put on BBC Radio or CNN and walk out of our classes, and all of a sudden our students would speak with that accent at the end of the course. But we all know this does not. So if you're teaching English as a non-native speaker and you worry whether you should be doing this, whether you're doing this correctly, whether your students will have worse effects when it comes to teaching pronunciation, then please stop worrying right now. There's absolutely no evidence anywhere that those perceived as native speakers are better pronunciation teachers, or that they have better effects in the classes, or that students will somehow pick up a particular accent just from being in that person's classes. As a non-native speaker, you can be a fantastic pronunciation teacher. What matters is that you know how to teach pronunciation. It does not matter whether you have a foreign accent, what's your first language. What really matters is your preparation for teaching pronunciation. Now, if you'd like to watch the rest of the interview with Professor John Levis, then check out the link right below this video and join TEFL Equity Academy, where the full interview is available for the members, and you can also access other courses where I talk about teaching pronunciation for English as a lingua franca, where you will learn what your strengths are as a non-native speaker, and you will learn how to tackle native speakerism. And if you enjoyed this video, then hit the like button right below and consider subscribing to my channel by hitting also that bell button so you don't miss any of my future videos.